The world watched in disbelief. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie were assassinated in Sarajevo. The assassin, Gavrilo Princip, was a Serbian nationalist. This act of violence, seemingly distant and insignificant, ignited a tinderbox of tensions across Europe. The assassination set in motion a chain reaction of diplomatic failures and military mobilizations. Within weeks, the major powers of Europe were at war. The world had sleepwalked into a conflict of unimaginable scale. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand was the catalyst, but the underlying causes of the war were far more complex. A tangled web of alliances, imperial rivalries and nationalistic fervor had been building for decades. The assassination was merely the spark that ignited this powder keg. Austria-Hungary, blaming Serbia for the assassination, issued an ultimatum with deliberately unacceptable terms. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, pledged its unwavering support. Russia, bound by treaty to protect Serbia, began mobilizing its troops. Germany, perceiving this as a threat, declared war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, was drawn into the conflict. Within days, the intricate system of alliances meant to maintain peace had instead plunged Europe into chaos. The guns of August 1914 marked the beginning of a global conflict that would forever change the course of human history. The world was at war. The early months of the war were marked by rapid movement and sweeping offensives. German forces, following the Schlieffen Plan, aimed for a swift victory over France. However, the war quickly bogged down into a brutal stalemate along the Western Front. This stalemate was characterized by trench warfare, a new and horrific form of combat. From the English Channel to the Swiss border, a vast network of trenches snaked across the landscape. Soldiers on both sides faced unimaginable conditions. They lived in these trenches, often for months at a time, surrounded by mud, rats, and the constant stench of death. The trenches were a terrifying and claustrophobic world, where death could come at any moment from an artillery shell, a sniper's bullet, or a poison gas attack. Life in the trenches was a nightmare. Disease was rampant, and the psychological toll of constant bombardment was immense. Soldiers endured relentless shelling, machine gun fire, and the ever-present threat of enemy attack. The space between the trenches, known as no man's land, was a treacherous expanse of barbed wire, craters, and death. Attacks across no man's land were often suicidal. Soldiers would be mowed down by machine guns or blown apart by artillery. The few who managed to reach the enemy trenches faced brutal hand-to-hand combat. The stalemate on the Western Front would continue for over 4 years, claiming millions of lives. World War I was a conflict unlike any before it. It was a war of unprecedented scale and brutality, driven by technological advancements that would forever change the face of warfare. These new technologies, while intended to break the stalemate, often only escalated the horrors of war. The machine gun, a weapon of terrifying efficiency, transformed battlefields into killing fields. Artillery, more powerful and accurate than ever before, rained death down upon the trenches. Poison gas, first used by the Germans in 1915, added a new dimension of terror to the battlefield. Chlorine, mustard gas, and other chemical weapons caused excruciating burns, blindness, and agonizing death. Tanks, lumbering behemoths of steel, were introduced in an attempt to break the deadlock of trench warfare. Airplanes, initially used for reconnaissance, soon became weapons of war, armed with machine guns and bombs. These technological advancements, while intended to break the stalemate, often only escalated the horrors of war. They led to unprecedented casualties and contributed to the war's devastating impact. World War I was a conflict of unimaginable brutality, a war of attrition that claimed the lives of millions. The human cost of the war was staggering. An entire generation of young men was decimated in the trenches. Millions more were left physically wounded, scarred by the horrors they had witnessed. Estimates vary, but it is believed that over 16 million soldiers and civilians died as a result of the war. The wounded numbered in the tens of millions. The war left countless families shattered, their lives forever altered by the loss of loved ones. The psychological scars of war ran deep, leaving many veterans struggling to cope with the trauma they had experienced. The war had profound social and economic consequences. Women who had taken on new roles in the workforce during the war began to demand greater rights and opportunities. The war also led to the collapse of empires and the redrawing of the political map of Europe. The world after the war was a very different place from the world before it. Section 5, A World Remade, The Collapse of Empires. The war's end in 1918 did not bring peace, but rather a fragile and uneasy truce. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, formally ended the war but sowed the seeds for future conflict. The treaty, with its harsh punishments for Germany, bred resentment and instability in Europe. The Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman and Russian empires, once major powers, collapsed under the weight of war. New nations emerged from the ruins of these empires, but their borders were often drawn hastily and without regard for ethnic or religious differences. This led to future conflicts and tensions that would plague Europe for decades to come. The war had a profound impact on the global balance of power. The United States, which had emerged from the war as a major economic and military power, retreated into isolationism. This left a power vacuum in Europe that would have disastrous consequences in the years to come. Section 6. Shifting sands, new ideologies and rising tensions. The war also had a profound impact on the political landscape. The horrors of trench warfare and the unprecedented scale of death led many to question traditional notions of nationalism and patriotism. The war also gave rise to new ideologies such as communism and fascism that would shape the course of the 20th century. In Russia, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power in the 1917 October Revolution. The Bolsheviks promised peace, land and bread to the war-weary Russian people. They established the Soviet Union, the world's first communist state. In Italy, Benito Mussolini, a former journalist, founded the Fascist Party. Mussolini exploited the economic and social chaos of post-war Italy to gain power. He promised to restore order and national pride, appealing to Italians' sense of humiliation after the war. Fascism, with its emphasis on nationalism, militarism and authoritarianism, would soon find adherents in other parts of Europe, most notably in Germany. Section 7. The Great War's Long Shadow. The legacy of World War I is long and complex. It was a war that shattered empires, redrew boundaries, and gave rise to new ideologies. The war also left an enduring legacy of trauma and loss. The lost generation, as those who came of age during the war were known, struggled to make sense of the horrors they had witnessed. The war's impact on art, literature, and music was profound. Artists and writers grappled with the war's horrors, producing works that reflected the disillusionment and despair of a generation. The war also had a lasting impact on military strategy and tactics. The development of new technologies such as the tank and the airplane revolutionized warfare, leading to the development of new doctrines and strategies. The war also had a profound impact on international relations. The League of Nations, created in the aftermath of the war, was an attempt to prevent future conflicts through collective security and international cooperation. However, the League was ultimately unsuccessful in preventing World War II. Section 8. The Importance of Remembrance. Today, as we commemorate the centenary of the end of World War I, it is more important than ever to remember the sacrifices of those who fought and died in that conflict. It is a time to reflect on the horrors of war and to reaffirm our commitment to peace. The lessons of World War I are as relevant today as they were a century ago. We must never forget the human cost of war. We must work to resolve conflicts peacefully through dialogue and diplomacy. We must reject the forces of hatred, intolerance and extremism that can lead to war. And we must honor the sacrifices of those who have served in our armed forces by striving to create a more just and peaceful world. Section 9. A call for peace in a divided world. The world today faces many challenges. We live in an age of globalization, technological advancement, and rapid social change. These changes bring with them both opportunities and risks. We must work together to address global challenges such as climate change, poverty, and inequality. We must also be vigilant in defending the values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The centenary of World War I is a time for reflection, remembrance, and a renewed commitment to peace. Let us honor the sacrifices of those who fought and died in that conflict by working to create a more peaceful and just world for all. Let us learn from the mistakes of the past and work together to build a brighter future.